Let's say you disagree with the political views of the people who run the country, the billionaire class, the Tesla drivers, our self-appointed clergy on social media, the retired prosecutors and spy chiefs you so often see on television opining about things. If you're watching this show, you're probably not all that impressed by these people. You don't wish them personal harm, of course. Some of them are well-meaning people. But you don't think they've done a very good job for America, though somehow they themselves are richer than ever. You might have voted for Donald Trump to make that very point. Have you ever considered what these people think of you for voting the way that you did, for daring to be insolent and disobedient? How would they punish you if they ever got the chance? Ever think of that? Well, wonder no more. Yesterday, Paul Manafort received 4 years in prison for bank fraud and tax evasion. Manafort will be 70 years old in a couple of weeks. He's got no criminal record of any kind. His sentence is considerably longer than the national average for the charges that he pled to. By the time Manafort gets out of prison, he will be elderly, broke, and disgraced. But for our ruling class, that's not nearly enough punishment. Manafort briefly managed Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and for that, they believe he must die in prison. Anything less cannot be allowed.
Shocking news.
Shocking. And I'll tell you, as a former prosecutor, I'm embarrassed. As an American, I'm upset.
From the very beginning, this judge seemed to have had a hard-on for just the Mueller probe overall.
It's a serious crime, and he got a slap on the wrist. And I think for that, people should be outraged.
I find this jaw-dropping, really.
Really? That's surprising.
It's an extraordinarily lenient sentence in light of the extent and scope of Mr. Manafort's criminality.
Paul Manafort got the special, clubby, Washington elite friendly treatment.
It's an outrage, and it's disrespectful of the American people.
Paul Manafort must die. That's what they're demanding. Robert Mueller agrees with them. Mueller asked that Manafort receive up to 24 years in prison. For perspective, that is more than twice what the average murderer in this country spends behind bars. That's a death sentence. Keep in mind that serial murderer Al Capone only got 11 years for crimes similar to those that Manafort's been charged with. But Capone was just a gangster. Paul Manafort is an enemy of the Democratic Party, and that's much worse. Is there a single person in America who believes that Manafort would be going to jail if he hadn't run Donald Trump's presidential campaign? Everyone in Washington knows that. There are a lot of Republican consultants here who are grateful tonight that they didn't take the job. They're heading out on spring break tomorrow. Manafort is heading to prison. The judge in the case clearly understands what's happening here. As he passed down his sentence, Judge T.S. Ellis reminded those watching that Manafort was, quote, not before this court for having anything to do with collusion with the Russian government to influence this election. That's literally true. Manafort has not been charged with any crime related to Russian collusion. Nobody has been charged with a crime related to Russian collusion. That's a fact. It's not an opinion. There's no dispute about it. And yet somehow a lot of people are still out there lying about this, probably because no one in the press ever calls them on it. Watch your elected officials say something totally untrue in the most self-righteous possible way.
The American people would be justified in feeling that there has been some miscarriage of justice here. What Paul Manafort did was essentially potentially threaten our very democracy, the principles of our democracy.
This news came out about Paul Manafort, and I'm really ticked off about this.
Were you shocked that he only got 47 months?
This criminal justice system can't surprise me anymore.
It's a sentence that is far too short. You know, I think I spent more days in detention in high school than Judge Ellis thinks that Paul Manafort should spend in jail.
So Cory Booker is, quote, very ticked off that Paul Manafort may not die in jail for cheating on his taxes. Keep in mind, this is the same Cory Booker who recently has spent hours on the Senate floor wagging his finger in the face of America over mass incarceration and our broken justice system. The same Cory Booker who worked so hard to reduce the sentences for fentanyl dealers and applauded when the bill passed. Yet that's also the same Cory Booker who now is outraged that a tax cheat isn't getting the death penalty. Has Cory Booker ever cheated on his taxes? Hope not. That'd be hypocrisy. It'd be interesting to know. It would be interesting to know if any of these hyenas circling Paul Manafort has ever fudged a deduction or somehow violated our complex banking laws. Somebody should check. The penalty's pretty high these days. Just kidding. This isn't about taxes, obviously. Cory Booker knows that well. It's about using power to crush your political opponents in order to get more power. The same principle will be on display next week when Manafort is sentenced for failing to register under the Foreign Agent Registration Act of 1938. That will be an amazing moment, if only because of how rarely it occurs. It's like Halley's Comet here in Washington. In the space of 50 years between 1966 and 2015, the DOJ charged a total of 7 people in FARA cases. Just 3 of them were convicted. Meanwhile, the most powerful foreign lobbies in Washington still are not registered under FARA. Robert Mueller has no plans to indict them. Of course not. They never made the mistake of running Donald Trump's presidential campaign.